All right. Well, welcome to our September Echo Network meeting. It's kind of hard to believe that it's already September. I know, at least for me, all the kiddos are back in school and getting all sorts of fun germs, and it's just that time of year, unfortunately. So just a reminder that Echo Network is Early Childhood Hoosiers Outdoors and is just a bi-monthly meeting where we get together to share some resources. I think today we'll have a little bit of a smaller group, but that is okay. I know some folks will be watching it later online. So for our introduction today, our fun question is if you can just introduce yourself and then what or who makes you laugh? Which I know is kind of an oddball question, but I promise I will relate it back a little bit later. So what or who makes you laugh? So Foy, could we start with you?
Sure. Uh, I definitely have coworkers who make me laugh, and also my kiddos. Recently, they've been doing a lot of this like backward hoodie thing, and then they put sunglasses on, and it's hilarious when they try and like move around the house that way. So always a good time.
Yeah, how
My
about you,
name's Foy.
Megan?
I didn't
Oh, go
introduce
ahead.
myself.
Oh yeah,
Hi,
who are
I'm
you?
Foy Spicer. I work at Mary Lee
Yeah,
as an environmental educator.
thank you.
I'm Megan Coriel. I have an in-home daycare, but am phasing out of that and am homeschooling my own kids. Recently, who makes me laugh is my 5-month-old nephew because he thinks everything is funny and you can do, the silliest things, and then you get those big baby belly laughs out of it. So that's always fun.
Yeah, that's definitely a really fun age. So, my name is Kaitlyn Sproles. I also work here at Mary Lee. And I think what or who makes me laugh right now is I have a 3.5-year-old that has been coming up with his own dad jokes because my husband just like constantly is telling dad jokes, and my 3.5-year-old son has like picked up on how it works. Like, what are some of the words you use? What are some of the common things? And it's just absolutely hilarious to me because he often like doesn't quite match the vocabulary with things that like actually make sense, but he calls him his knee slapper. So he's like, Mama, isn't that a knee slapper? And I'm just like, if you say so, buddy, if you say so. So that's just a fun little topic that I'll hopefully relate it back to as we get going. So yeah, I'm excited to be sharing a little bit with you all today. I just want to preface this by saying this is just a personal interest area of mine. I'm not super scientific and researcher and that sort of thing. It's just kind of a personal interest to me. And this past weekend, I had the privilege of attending a conference that was called Lost Sparrows, Healing Childhood Trauma. And it was over in Warsaw, Indiana. And it was a 2-day conference that was meant for a lot of different folks. It did have a faith-based component to it, but there were adoptive parents, foster parents, social workers, teachers, school administrators, all sorts of really great people doing some really fun things. And the speakers were from across the country and just really wealths of knowledge sharing their information. So I just want to preface this presentation by saying I am not a professional, I'm not a counselor, I'm not a social worker. This is just something that I'm personally really interested in because I think we need to start looking at education through a trauma lens just because it's kind of staggering statistics, but the number of students that we deal with that have trauma in various forms. So, I first want us to think about, and this is going to be kind of a conversation that I want us to have today. So I apologize, it's only two of you, but the rest of you that are watching later, please follow along and please maybe write down your answers, and I'd love to see what you all come up with. But the first thing I want you to think about is what is trauma? So, how would you define trauma? So, maybe what's your personal definition of trauma? What are some buzzwords that kind of come to mind when you think of trauma? So, I'm going to give you all like 30 seconds of thinking time on that. All right. Is anybody willing to share a word or definition that comes to mind for you?
I would say like adverse experiences that have a negative impact.
Definitely. Yeah,
Yeah, I was thinking of like things that cause damage. Like trauma is when damage is inflicted, whether that is psychological or physical
definitely.
or emotional. And so, how do we like has some sort of lasting impact that's
Mm-hmm.
negative?
Yeah. So as you all can imagine, there's a lot of different definitions depending on who you're asking about what trauma is. So the definition that I really like is any event or experience that is physically and or psychologically overwhelming to the exposed individual. So it's something that triggers that like fight or flight kind of physiological change in our body. And so it can be something really small or it could be something really large. It can also be one specific event. So, like this week, I've been thinking about, wow, for those of us that lived through 9/11, maybe we weren't as personally impacted, but I know for me, when I still see that date on the calendar, I'm like, oh my gosh, I remember like exactly where I was when I learned about that. It could be something like a car accident where you can very clearly define like this happened to me, and I was this age. Or it can be something that occurs repeatedly. So it's something that happens over time. So there isn't necessarily like a specific instance. It's a very diffuse sort of situation. And I also want to mention that like two individuals can have the same traumatic event, but they process it differently. So whether that's like siblings that are going through the same event or classmates, they just respond differently. Their bodies are just a little more resilient or they have slightly different temperament than their peers. And so every person experiences trauma in a different way. And so it can look really different for everybody, which is, I think, what sometimes makes it hard because a lot of times the students that we're dealing with, they might not be, they might not have the vocabulary yet. The children that are younger than 4 can't necessarily like express themselves in words. They know something happened, but they don't know how to describe it to you. And so trauma, as you all can imagine, is very harmful, specifically to children. Um, as adults, we have the ability to like walk away from a situation if it's starting to feel a little bit off, or we have the tools in our toolbox, we have the people we can talk with that helps us get through what could potentially be a traumatic situation for our younger friends. Um, and like I said, a lot of the trauma for children is when they're pre-verbal or they're pre-conscious, like they just, yeah, their brain is not developed enough to be able to process that trauma. One of the things that I found really interesting is there's a lot of research being done right now about trauma, almost like even in the womb, right? So, like babies who were separated from their birth mom at birth and went to a loving family and had great childhood, like they still have that trauma that's been internalized in their body and in their DNA. And like I said, sometimes our bodies or in children, the bodies experience trauma, but their minds might not be able to identify it right away. They don't have that really active memory. And trauma is also really hard for children because they refer to it sometimes as the power of one. So children who experience the world and have only themselves to rely on versus somebody who has a loving caregiver or has a trusted adult. Um, and so all of those things make trauma really hard for children. And some of those children are ones that we're seeing in a lot of our programming. Um, so what would you all say are some of the common traumas that our students experience? You can just kind of shout these out. So Megan, I just asked, what are some of the common traumas that some of the students coming to us may have experienced?
Families that have moved recently is
Yeah,
one, and then divorce or like separation. Somehow, like their families have changed structure and they are just along for the ride. They didn't get to make that
yeah,
decision.
yeah, for sure.
Yeah, I mean, like in just instability in the home, even if it's not moving, it could be different people living with or then not living with, or um, inconsistencies there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah, and processing like big medical events, like not necessarily like theirs too, but also like in their families, they might not
Mm-hmm.
have the metacognition to like understand what's happening to
Yeah.
their loved one, and it can feel very scary.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, you guys hit on a lot of the ones that are like kind of the most common ones, I think, with children is moving, which you said. Like a lot of times I know moving for me is hard, so I can only imagine how hard it would be on a small child. As you mentioned, like parents separating, or even if they're growing up with just one parent or one caregiver, so maybe they're living with grandma. Um, One that I pulled out of our nature preschool is last year we had a tornado that hit Albion, where a lot of our families lived. And we were seeing that manifest itself after the event with children kind of playing like they were going to, their tornado shelter and some of those sorts of things. So severe weather. It also could be things like household challenges. So maybe they do witness domestic violence or seeing substance abuse or family member with mental illness or even having, an incarcerated family member is pretty common. Um, and then obviously, kind of the far end of the spectrum then would be things like neglect. So it might be emotional or physical. The one that was really shocking to me is like how some of our students can look normal, right? They're being well fed, they have clothes on their body, but they could be getting really emotionally neglected. And that was one that I was like, wow, that's like, that's a really big one. One of the things that we were talking a little bit about at our conference this weekend was the impact of COVID and how
Mhm.
that's manifesting itself in children's behaviors. And I know at least at Mary Lee, we talk about that a lot. We call them the COVID kids, right? Like it's the kids that are now in kindergarten and first grade, and some of those that are just, they really miss those key developmental times to be interacting with one another. And so that's kind of manifesting through the behavior. Um, One of the things that they talked about was there's a research study on the still face caregiver or the still face mother. So historically, that would have been things like mental health challenges, like maybe mom has postpartum depression, and so she's not bonding with that newborn. And now what they're seeing is how many of us have a cell phone, and I know I'm guilty of it. I know when I was nursing my son, how often was I staring into his eyes and building that connection versus like, oh, there's a really fun video I want to watch, right? Like that we're focused on that and we have that still face. We're not making that eye contact with our young children and how important that eye contact is even from birth. And so that one was like, oh, I know a challenge that I have that I need to work through as well. So what does that trauma then look like? So, what are some of the behaviors that you have seen that you think might be trauma responses?
Like a range of emotions. So whether it's sadness or anger or quick change in emotions, maybe like here to here or up to down.
Definitely.
Yeah, and that like acting things out, like I've definitely seen kids do
Mm-hmm.
um, like that's how they're processing a lot of what they're learning, and they do it with trauma too. They're like, you can't live here anymore because you're not like mom and dad are divorced, and like having like a whole like play scenario within their group of what's going on.
Mm-hmm.
And like that's very interesting to see. Or yeah, and like trying to put that same feeling on another child to like figure out how you're supposed to respond to it. I assume is what they're doing, maybe not, but
Yeah.
like it's very interesting to watch.
Mm-hmm.
And then sometimes we just see kids who will shy away, who will like withdraw and like
Mm-hmm.
want to not want to be engaged because engaging feels scary.
Yeah.
Um, Always a hard one.
Yeah. Yeah, so I think the ones that we commonly look for are some of the ones you all hit on. They might be more in that flight, fight, freeze. And then the new one that I learned this weekend was like fawn. I never heard of the fourth F on there. So fighting might look like, okay, yeah, they're actually, kicking or saying things like I hate you, or they're really anxious behavior. like their needs are not being met, and so they're just like manifesting that through other means. I know when my toddler gets hangry, sometimes he starts, showing some of that behavior. It might be flight. Like I know we've dealt with, some kids that just physically run away. Like they just can't stay in that space, and that's just their defense mechanism is running away. Or freezing, so they're quiet. I think those are some of the ones that you were talking with, Foy. And then the fourth one is fawn. Some people also call it like comply or submit. So their goal is like they just want to please the adult. So this might be the kid that's just like glued to you, that's just like happy, just like trying to please you all of the time. And for me, that was new because I was like, I had never recognized that that could be a response of trauma. So one of the things I have like three phrases that they use a lot that really resonated with me, but the first ones are behaviors are a result of our past experiences. So everything we're doing today is a result of something from our past, whether that's obviously positive, negative. One of the teachers had in her classroom, all feelings are welcome, but all behaviors are not. And I just really resonated with that. I was like, yeah, it's okay to feel whatever you're feeling, but how that manifests itself is not always okay, especially in a classroom. One of the other speakers compared it to above the surface, it looks like a shark fin. So we've all seen like those movies or videos of a shark fin and everybody's really scared. But then they were saying what's below the surface is like a scared little goldfish. Like it's this kid that beneath the surface is this very insecure, child, and above is the shark fin. Like they're putting on this front, but what is happening beneath the surface? And I was like, oh, yeah, that one really resonated with me with some of the students we work with. So another thing I wanted to move on to is some of the strategies. So how do we begin to kind of deal with, or what sort of strategies can we use as we're working with students? So this is obviously going to be very different for every child, every group of students. I don't think it's fair for us to like leave here and go out and be like, oh my gosh, like all the children in the world are traumatized. Like that's not where I'm trying to get at, but it's just a good lens for us to begin looking at why some of our students are acting certain ways. Um, so do any of you have any of the tools in your toolbox that you like to utilize when you're seeing this behavior manifest itself in whatever way you're seeing it?
Yeah, I think one I've learned recently from another teacher friend is to say pause. And it's not necessarily stop, but it's like a stop is like what you use when you need like a child, or freeze when you need a child to stop doing something that's dangerous. But like pause is like, hey, let's consider what we're doing here. And those moments of like, I need you to pause, and then I'm going to give you more instruction, like giving like that weight. And I tried it a little with the pre-K this last week, and I was like, oh yeah, yeah, I can see how this would be a useful like reminder of it's not said in anger or upset. It's just like, I need you to listen to me right now. And I
Mhm.
think that that's kind of like a uh, helpful way to engage, I guess. And then I also think consistency, like showing up and showing that you care, like is such a big thing for especially the littles. I think everyone needs that, but like definitely our littles.
Definitely.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and I was thinking about like proximity. Sometimes being closer might be helpful in a certain situation, and sometimes that giving space would be. So just that kind of reading that situation and
Mm-hmm.
seeing if you moving your proximity to the child is helpful in one way or another.
Yeah. Yeah, those are all really good strategies. Yeah. So some other ones that I thought and really resonated with me is like mirroring and modeling. So in order to help our students regulate, like we ourselves have to be very well regulated. And I know from personal experience, like that's not always easy, right? You have that one kid that's just like really getting on your nerves sometimes, but it's important for us to be able to take a step back and make sure we're regulated. Um, because that will mirror onto the students. And if we're down on their level and we're talking nice and calmly to them, hopefully that's going to help de-escalate their behaviors as well. So helping them develop some of those coping skills, modeling those coping skills, even verbally saying, "Hey, right now I'm feeling like this." So that way you're helping label those emotions. The one speaker, we walked in the room and she had like the whole emotion chart that you've seen that has like the 50 different words to describe your emotion. And she was like, pick which ones you're feeling. And then she's like, how hard was that? She was like, and we're adults. And then you want me to pick like two of these emotions? She's like, there's too many options. Like, what does this even mean? And so she was saying that it's really important for us to pick like 5 to 7 that are ones that our children can connect with and use those. So instead of having, 50 options, narrow it down. Or just say like, I'm feeling happy, sad, or mad today. She's like, sometimes with the younger kiddos, like that's what they need. Which I thought I really resonated with that one. As an adult, mirroring that, how to apologize. Like, I'm really sorry. I did raise my voice with you. I didn't mean to do that. I was feeling very frustrated. To mirror that, so then our students then know what does it look like to give a sincere apology instead of just saying, I'm sorry all the time. Like, what does that look like? Um, Practicing some mindfulness, so doing some breathing techniques with the students. I know that's one that I've recently integrated last year into some of our field trips when students are just getting really overwhelmed. I'm like, okay, let's just stand here, take a big breath, get the oxygen to the brain. It helps us out as educators and it helps our students out. Being present, I think, is one, seeing what our students are actually doing, being very present, even if we have a million emails or text messages coming through, like just being present in that moment. And then also mirroring how to rebound after difficulty. So not only apologizing, but showing them like, okay, this thing just happened to me, but here I am. I'm kind of picking myself up, brushing it off, and continue moving on. Some of the things that I know we always do a really good job of is getting down on their level. So if we're talking to a preschooler, we're getting down on one knee and we're kind of looking at them face to face, helping them reconnect in the present moment. So there's lots of grounding techniques. I'm sure you guys have seen the different stickers, like the one that's a triangle that's like breathe in, hold, breathe out. Do that 3 times. There's a lot of different ones you can use just to kind of help them reconnect to the present moment. So maybe that's asking them to look for 3 things and listen for 2 or smelling one, like some different techniques with their senses. Some of the things they were talking about were even like a sensory reset. So if you've ever taken like a brain break with your students and they're just like bouncing around listening to music or something, or maybe you give them a mint, or maybe there's something they can smell. They said that sometimes can just kind of help them reset. Um, Giving our students choice to select what they want to do. This might not be possible all the time, but I know at least with our preschool, giving the students choice. Like, would you like to play in the sandbox, or you want to jump off the log, or you want to build something? So the more agency we can give the students. Um, Routines are important. We know this, right? But the more routine and the predictability there are for our students, the better. So they can start thinking like, okay, I'm going to get my rain gear on, I'm going to get my backpack, and then I'm going to move to circle time. And after circle time, then this happens. Because when we mess up that routine, they just have like no idea what they should be doing, how they should be acting, and that sort of thing. Some helpful phrases that we could possibly use are things like, it makes sense that, whatever. Or a lot of people feel blank when this happens. Or it sounds like, it looks like, I can imagine, I notice, some of those sorts of statements. Another helpful thing that I found was praising positive behavior or the effort they're putting into. So maybe they're not fully successful in zipping up their jacket, but maybe they're attempting and they're really trying. And so we can just constantly give them that praise of their behavior and the effort. Another one was using consistent language. So I think this one is really important, especially when you deal with students outside, like stay together. We're always going to tell our students, like, stay together, try again, make good choices. I know my son is obsessed with that phrase right now. Anytime I leave him, he's like, Mommy, make good choices. And I'm like, okay, thanks, bud. Like, you too. But some of those, like, consistent when they hear it all the time, it really becomes ingrained in their brains. And then another one was positive greetings at the door. And I think that one would be really easy, especially for some of our teachers that are in a more standard school system, like meeting your students at the door and maybe you're giving them a high five, or maybe you have a chart. I'm sure we've all seen those where students can get a high five, or maybe they can get a hug, or maybe they just want to be left alone for the morning. But just having that routine of, I'm going to wait at the door for my teacher to come and greet me. My teacher's going to have a smile on their face, and it just like sets the tone then for the rest of that day. Is there any questions about some of those strategies? I know I kind of gave a lot, but I'm hoping that at least a couple of those maybe landed or resonate with each of you.
Yeah, I hadn't really thought about it, but when I worked for Montessori, we always greeted our kids. Like we always sat at a chair that was directly opposite the door and greeted our children as they came into the classroom space. And I never really thought about it. Like it was part of the routine, but like it was meant to be like a welcoming, and that is a valuable thing to do. And so, yeah, be more intentional about doing it. I think I already do it, but maybe I'll pay attention to see how I'm doing it.
Yeah,
Well, and all these things will be good for all kids too. So they
right.
might be more necessary for students based on their experiences, but will still be good for, will be good and beneficial for everybody. So it's not,
Yeah,
yeah, it's not something that you only need to target towards a certain, chunk.
right.
It's yeah.
Yeah, the whole group can benefit from these, not just our
Mhm.
children. Yeah,
Yeah.
that have trauma for sure. Okay. A few other kind of tidbits that I thought that really resonated with me is what they call the safety paradox. So sometimes when our students do finally feel safe, which sometimes can take a really long time, everything can come flooding back for them. So they finally met this one adult that they can really trust. And for some of our students, like safety is not safe. Like they've never had that safe place to land. For them, what they call like fires are safe. Like they're always running towards these crazy things. And so sometimes we can try and we can try and we can try to be that person to them, and it might not land. And that's okay. We're still somebody that has had a small impact on these students that we're working with. The conference, like the big premise of the entire conference this weekend was hope. Like we all have to have hope in the world that we're living in and the jobs that we're doing. And what I liked is they said hope is a function of struggle. And I was like, I never thought of hope being a function of struggle, but it really resonated with me. And so they said, there's like hope upon hope upon hope. And when you're thinking about an expectation versus a reality, that gap between the expectation and reality, that's where our hope sits. And so for me, I was like, wow, what is like my expectation? What is my reality? So like how can we, yeah, increase that hope? The next point that really resonated with me is how to set boundaries with students. I know I even resonated with this as a parent, like, wow, what boundaries do I have? And the thing that they compared it to was a property line. Like everybody has their own property line and their boundaries, and that these are ours to hold. So it's our job to tell our students, this is my property line. Like, I don't think it is okay for you to yell at me in our classroom. So that's my property line. Maybe Foy, maybe Megan, like your property lines would be a little bit different on that. But these are all our property lines, and these are ours to hold. And that's going to look different for everybody. But that's important to communicate with our students and to show them that, hey, this is legitimately, if I say there's no yelling in the classroom and these are the consequences, like there is a consequence. Because that also helps our students as they become older and more mature to make their own property lines, to say, like, this is not okay. I don't allow you to do X or Y to me, sort of things. And so that one was really, I think, really impactful for me that these are ours. Like a lot of times we're like, oh, these are just classroom rules or, these are whatever, but these are our like property lines to hold. And another thing, I know I was talking with some of my Merrily colleagues about this today, is like I feel like I got a deep dive into the brain and how the brain works and the whole like different parts of the brain represented by the your hand. And for me, it was so interesting to learn all the fun research that folks are doing across the country on the brain and on the brain physiology and the chemistry and everything about that because our brain is so complex. And it seems like every day they're learning something new about how our brain responds to things, and especially how it responds to trauma and the impact short term of trauma and also long term on trauma. And so I just thought I need to go back to school or something to like learn more about that. But it was just really interesting to see like it's not just physical. Like I think a lot of times we just attribute it to like physical responses or oh my gosh, they had too much screen time or they had too much sugar. Well, they may have, but it might also be something underneath the surface. All right, so I know earlier I asked you about laughter, and we talked a little bit about how laughter impacts us. How often do you think a 4-year-old laughs in one single day, 24 hours? How often does a 4-year-old laugh? And for you can't cheat because it's written in our notes, but
I know. I tried not to look. I think I may have read it, but I don't know. I read something and I was like, I don't know what that means. But
yeah,
yeah, I would hmm. Is it like something like 12 times like a day? Probably more than that. I don't know. I love the way kids play together. They're always seems like they're
yeah,
laughing. So maybe.
yeah.
I don't know. I was thinking more like 50 times a day.
Yeah. So one research study showed that 4-year-olds laugh approximately 300 times in one day.
Wow.
Wow. Okay, so those of us that are closer to putting a zero on that four, closer to 40, how many times do we like laugh in a day?
Oh gosh. Well, if they're like 300, then shit,
If they're 300,
probably quite a bit less. Like 25?
maybe 25? What do you think, Foy?
I already read it, so I can't say.
Okay.
That one I did read.
Yeah, so they said the average 4-year-old, so the same study that did the 4-year-old, the average 40-year-old only laughs 4 times a day.
That's
Lord.
And I
so
was like, I
sad.
kind of resonated with that. I was like, yeah, I mean, I have a toddler, but he makes me laugh, but not 400 times a day.
Oh,
And so one of the things they were talking about in one of the classes I went to was how to utilize humor, like appropriate, age appropriate, vocabulary appropriate humor, like how to increase humor in your classroom. And so
Hmm.
one of the things they were talking about is, first of all, like what is the difference between comedy versus humor versus levity? And so what they were really talking about was how can we increase that levity? And that levity, in case you don't know, the definition is a mindset that includes an inherent state of receptiveness to an active seeking of joy. So how are we seeking that joy in life? And so one of the things they've learned is that laughter really helps build trust. And so this could be something as silly as they gave us all like the clown noses to wear, which I'm not going to put on, but like the red clown noses. Like how much would that make a child laugh or even our coworkers laugh if we showed up to work with a clown nose? It helps us connect with our students in a different way. They say laughter increases resiliency of our children. Like if they go through a stressful situation and they have these tools, right? We're trying to give our students as many tools to put in their toolbox to get through life. That laughter can help increase their resiliency and it can help us create new bonds and trust. So, one of the things I want to read is like the science of humor. So, it says when we laugh authentically, so not at the expense of others, but when we have an authentic laugh, our brains release hormones that make us feel happy. So that's the dopamine that's released. Our brains make us feel less stressed because we're lowering our cortisol levels. We're slightly euphoric because of endorphins. and we're more trusting because our brain is releasing that oxytocin. And so I just thought it was really interesting that just through laughter, and I was thinking back on like my experiences in school, like some of my most vivid experiences are when teachers were like making a fool of themselves or like making the lesson really fun and engaging. Like that's just what sticks in our brain. Um, and so I was like, how could we increase laughter and that levity even into some of our outdoor settings? Which I thought was really interesting thing for us to kind of
Yeah.
think about how we can increase laughter or how can we power what our students are already, maybe we have that class clown that we can maybe rein in a little bit, make sure they're appropriate, but like how can we utilize them in increasing that laughter in our classrooms?
Yeah. I recently ran into some research around language development, and not just like as kids acquire language, but as like a way to bond with people, and how we talk and the words we use. Like we when we're in a group that we feel connected to and are feel safe in, we will start to develop like nicknames or like language that we know that might not be like the rest of the world does. I think families often like develop these pretty quickly because we spend so much time with our kids in our group settings. But like it's really interesting to watch language develop. And I was thinking of, we have conservation leadership school, which is like high school age kiddos, and like the language that they developed over the course of like 5 days, like where they started to like get nicknames for each other, and they started to like have names for places that were their names, and like that type of thing starts to develop, and how much that is like part of like bonding and feeling comfortable with one another. And often it was very humorous. Often like the things they remembered or were like referencing and riffing off of, that they were reiterating, were like really funny to them. And I'm sure when their parents came for the presentations at the end, they didn't know what was going on, but they could sense that there was like some kinship
Yeah,
and some camaraderie there.
yeah, that bonding for sure. Yeah. All right. So the last thing I want to leave you all with is three resources, and we can share those in the chat, and then I'll also make sure they get in the email for folks that are watching the recording. But the first one is the Lost Sparrows conference itself. So the conference that I went to, this is, I think, the sixth year that they have run that conference. They record all of their sessions. So the workshop sessions are not recorded because we like go through and share a lot of stories and personal sorts of things. But the rest of their like panel discussions and some of the presenters are all recorded, and those are all available online. They do charge, it's like $15 a month, but you can watch as many videos as you possibly can within a month. You can stop your month and start it like if you know you're gonna have like bunch of time this winter or something. Like maybe that might be some fun videos for you to watch. Um, the second one is a YouTube video. It's about a 10-minute YouTube video. It is by the author that wrote the book The Body Keeps Score. So I don't know if any of you have heard that book before. But that is just a really short 10-minute YouTube video by the author of that book. And it's called Your Reality Narrows After Trauma. And that's a gentleman named Bessel. And then the last thing is there's an organization called the School Care Team, and they are actually out of Fort Wayne, so not too far from some of us. And on their website, they have some I don't know if it's like minute of hope, minute of, let me look at my notes here really fast. Mental health minute. So they're like 2 or 3 minutes. They have a lot of videos on hope, laughter, that sort of thing. And they also have a lot of good resources. Obviously, they're primarily working with schools and like public school systems, but they have a lot of really good resources on their website that I think could be very applicable in the work that many of us do. The other thing that I thought was really ironic, and they handed it out to us at the very end, so I didn't have a chance to pick their brain as much on this, but they have some new curriculum coming out about how we can help our students increase hope, because that's like what our students really need. And the first lesson in that is increasing hope through nature. And for me, I was like, well, duh, like nature helps every facet of life. Why not hope? But for them, it was just like a new light bulb went off. And I was like, oh my goodness, we need to connect. Because I was like, this is really cool work, like how we can use nature to help our students. And so they, like I said, have some curriculum coming out soon. And this curriculum is the one that they shared with us is for more of a middle school audience, but it's talking about, hey, go out in your schoolyard. That might be a concrete jungle, but like, what can you find there? And some of those sorts of things. But I just thought it was really ironic that that was like a 30-second of their presentation was how to use nature to increase your students' hope and resiliency. And for us that work in that field, I was like, that, that's how this works. So my hope would be that, yeah, this research obviously would continue. I know I personally have a lot of homework that I want to do on doing some more research and figuring out how can we incorporate this nature-based work and trauma work and how can those bridge? I know Gretchen, one of our previous speakers, that's a big part of her forest school that she runs over in Lafayette. Um, but it's just something, yeah, I'm personally interested in and learning more about. So I don't know if you have any questions. I can try to answer them or I can try to send you some resources that might be helpful.
Yeah, lots to think about, but thank you. Yeah, and those like all those resources and bookmark them and stuff. So yeah, that'll be
Yeah,
helpful.
perfect. All right. Foy, do you want to share with us our next Echo Network speaker?
Yeah, so we have another network, Echo Network, coming up on November 10th. So that'll again be the same time, Monday. And our speaker will be Eva Webb, who is exciting because she's a grad from the master's program, master's in environmental education. And she is coming to us from Fox Island, the county park in Fort Wayne, where she does drum circles. I have a kitty who's decided that she really wants to go outside and no one's letting her out, so she's going to come see me. So her presentation will be on connecting to the rhythms in nature, which sounds really fun. I've done a couple of her drum circles and gone to a couple other events that other people put on, and she does a really good job because she's very mindful of like the experience of it. And so she's going to share ways in which students can learn about nature through drumming, which is a great like full sensory experience, right? Like if we're talking about connecting in nature, a lot of that's like a big part of how our bodies connect. And Eva Webb is an environmental educator at Fox Island, which is part of Allen County Parks. She received her master's in environmental ed from Goshen College's Mary Lee Environmental Learning Center. She's a former interpretive naturalist with the Indiana State Parks. She grew up near the Appalachian Trail, which, man, that's a bucket list for me, in southern Pennsylvania. And she loves spending time in nature. And she's an avid hiker. She currently is down in Huntington, Indiana. Um, and she has three lovely children. And she's just started, like, she started doing drum circling. And, like, I think I knew her when she was starting to figure it out. And I was like, oh, she was so excited. In 2023, she got going and got to be a full facilitator, not just like someone who has things. And like along the way, she's acquired a bunch of drums and like learn different little games and things to play to engage with students. So I'm excited to hear her talk about that, especially as it relates to like how do we get kids more involved with their own bodies. And so yeah, we'll have her coming up. And just a last little note that we'll be hosting that will be our last Echo network for now. We're going to put a pause on the program. The Google group will stay open and active. So if you've got resources in there, keep sharing them and keep going there looking for what you need. And yeah, we also have another event coming up in February. We're going to do a roundtable on how volunteerism works in organizations like Mary Lee and other not-for-profit environmental organizations. So if you know some people locally, send them our way because we'd really appreciate having like more people is more information, right? Like we learn from each other as we go. So if we get a really good crowd of people who are doing local volunteer work, that would be, and organizing it, that would be really interesting. So send those to me. I'm Foy Spicer, and I will continue to be doing some volunteer stuff. So fspicer@goshen.edu. And that's what I've got for you today.
Yeah,
Anything
and
I'm
I would
missing?
also just mention in February, we will also be doing our what we're calling our OWL training, so our outdoor wilderness learning for educators. And so the dates for that is going to be February 25th, 26th, and 27th. And as we know more about that, we'll definitely send that out. I know some of you have participated in that training, but it's a really fantastic time to get together, see good examples of what nature-based education can look like. But it's also just a really good group of people to meet and fellowship with and learn from one another. And so we're really excited to be hosting that again this year. So I believe that is all for this month's Echo. Thank you, Megan and Foy, for participating. We had a nice, small but mighty group today, so thank you all. And for those of you that might be watching at home, please feel free to email me in your questions or some of your responses, because we can all continue learning and growing together. So you guys have a fantastic fall, and we will see you in November.
Thank
Bye.
you. Bye.